So someone listening out there, it's true. Like if you have the money and the budget and you want to grow, it's like you could literally reach out to people in your space. Go to chartable.com and look at the top, shows in your category and pitch them. Say, hey, would you do I'll pay you $100, $200 to do like a little 15-second host read. I'll provide the script for you and let's run it for 4 episodes or, hey, name your price. So that's like a very organic way to do paid ads or paid sponsorships.
Boom, 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 boom.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to the Hustle and Flowchart podcast with your boys, Matt Wolf and Joe Fier. Check it. Alrighty.
Hi there.
Hey.
All right. Today we nerded out.
We did. This is a podcast-terrific episode.
Yeah.
I cannot do that. What are these things called again?
We've been only saying the word about 50 times. Kazoo.
Oh,
It's a kazoo, and Matt doesn't know how to play a kazoo. Sounds beautiful, Matt. Sounds.
Wait. We were gonna try to do our jingle with it.
What's that jingle referring to?
38470.
Comp.
38470.
Comp. All right, we'll circle back to that. Let's intro our guest, actually, because that's why people are here, I think. But maybe they're here for a good kazooing. Who knows?
Yes. So let me preface this with, if you don't have a podcast, don't ignore this episode. This episode is important for everybody if you've got a media presence online.
True.
Because we're talking about getting on podcasts. We're also talking about podcast growth, but the strategies that we talk about around podcast growth are relevant to growth of anything, blog, or YouTube channel,
content,
anything.
It's all it is content.
Yeah, so don't ignore it because we're using the word podcasting a lot, because this is relevant to any sort of brand and any sort of content marketing. Mm-hmm. So let me preface with that. But today we are talking to Luis Diaz, who is the... What was that face for?
It's the look you're giving me when you're saying his name. Keep going.
Luis Diaz. And he's got a book called How to Get Your First 100,000 Podcast Downloads in 100 Days. And I've actually read that book. Apparently, I'm one of the few, but...
You are one of the few. I have not read it, but, I've flipped through it, and there are very specific strategies in there and tools that you can basically just swipe and try out yourself. And again, this is angled to podcasting, but don't shy away from using this for other content too, especially the strategies he says in this podcast as well.
Yeah.
And you can go to our show notes to get, I don't actually have a link for it because I think he was just going to send it to us afterwards.
Yeah.
So if you go to our show notes at evergreenprofits.com, find this episode, you can get his book for free.
Yeah.
The digital version.
Yeah. And then his website's podcastdomination.co. So I think you can get it from there as well. So Luis, he's actually helped with over 37 podcast launches in 2 years and has accumulated 3.7 million downloads.
That's pretty legit. Yeah, he has a agency that basically does this. He has a podcast on the back end of that, this book. Mm-hmm. And he's another guy from Austin, or not from Austin, but living in Austin. It seems like it's either San Diego or Austin. That's a lot of the folks that we're chatting with these days.
Seems like it. Yeah.
But yeah, Luis is just freaking awesome, man. You could tell he does a lot of similar stuff that we're doing, but also a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. A lot of lateral thinking. I think that's what my big takeaway here is, that it's not like the standard stuff you would hear about growing a podcast or really content in general. I'm going to do this interchangeably a little bit for this intro, at least, is he's talking about how to, get on other podcasts, or if you don't want to do that, you get published by other blogs or something like that, or publications. But there's specific strategies he gives in the book, but also definitely on this episode, where you'll probably get some ahas. We even got some ahas with the follow-up. He has a total system behind the scenes, depending on, what, and I think he said he would share that with us or some other, I don't know. He's going to share a lot of stuff.
There's going to be a lot of valuable stuff in the show notes and the notes.
And the notes. So yeah, get them both. Check them out both. But I love the perspective of how you can, in a cool way, in a nice way, not in a scammy kind of way, to get on other people's platforms and to really help each other out, establish relationships, grow your business, make more money, but also you're helping people in the same path.
Yeah. I think what I like about Luis and what we talked about with Luis is a growth hacker like us. Like he loves to just figure out like sort of little hacks that nobody else is doing to just move the needle on the podcast a little bit more, get a little bit more downloads, a little bit more subscribers. And he's just kind of hacking away at these podcasts. And some of this stuff have been really, really high leverage. I'm sure some of it didn't really pan out well, but he's just constantly experimenting and testing stuff and just hacking his way to the top. And that's essentially been our philosophy with this podcast as well. What can we do to grow it? What little tweak can we make to like hack our way up the charts just a little bit more? And so that's kind of the stuff that we talked about, is some of those growth hacks, but also what to do when you go on other people's podcasts. And this is just podcast goodness, but do keep in mind that this is relevant to all content marketing.
Yeah. So it's cool. And you'll see both sides of the coin is going on podcasts, like where you don't even have to have your own. And then you can, if you have your own, this is a freaking amazing resource as well. So it's good for everybody.
And we got notes coming. Like
got the notes. Earlier. Cool. So that's that signals it's time to talk about the notes. So get the notes. So you're just gonna tell them this is the spot where you can fast forward now. No. Maybe for some people, but why
don't do that, because
don't do that. I mean, you're only skipping on your own knowledge and your own time savings and ways to get more of these details so you don't have to do them yourself. So
plus you never know what Joe's gonna say.
And it's free. Yeah. And how bad Matt's kazooing can be, you can hear more of that. There you go. It's beautiful. It's like a tuba kazoo. That was great. Tube kazoo.
Kazuba? Ooh. I like Kazuba.
Yeah? You're going to go make one now?
No.
Add it to your musician wall?
I'm going to change my name.
Wow.
Welcome to Hustle and Flowchart with Joe and Kazuba.
Are we going to go down to the courthouse and I'm going to like actually film you changing your name as to Kazuba Fier? Fier.
Am I taking your last name now?
No, we're not getting married at the courthouse. You're changing your Kazuba name. Matthew can be your middle name now.
There we go.
Kazuba Matthew Wolf.
It'll be interesting to see what my dad thinks about that, since my middle name is currently my dad's name.
Ooh, well, you can deal with him, Kazuba. Yeah. I'm going to call you Kazuba from now on.
That's a problem for a different day.
All right, anyway, so get those notes. I think that's what we're talking about right here, right? Kazuba?
Right. If you go to, pull out your phone, assuming you're in a safe place to pull out your phone, and type the number 38470 and text the word comp to it. COMP. Comp.
That's why we keep making that annoying Kazuba jingle. Yeah. So 38470 on your text ding device, and then if you text the word comp, you will get those notes.
Yes, or you can go to hustleandflowchart.com/comp and you can get them notes there as well.
And we like to remind about the timing of these notes.
That's true. We don't want you to be blindsided. From the time this episode goes live, you got about 2 weeks to go grab those notes. After 2 weeks, they get locked into our vault, and then they're only available for our Evergreen Profits members.
2 weeks on the dot.
On the dot. Exactly on the dot. They actually get wiped off the web page. We scrubbed the web page.
We scrubbed it. It's been locked away in our very secure vault that is not that expensive to access. So you have that option as well if you so desire.
Yes. So
that is all.
Flowchart.com/comp or text comp to 38470. Go get those. And let's go talk to Luis about some podcasting stuff.
Hey, before we go over to the episode, I just want to give a shout out to our podcast sponsor, LinkedIn. And it's really cool because they showed up right at the same time where we've been obsessing over LinkedIn and testing it out as kind of a new, and I put that in quotes, platform to focus on and put our content on. It's actually working out really well. So we've noticed that people over there take action. These are actually professionals looking for professional type stuff to further their business and things like that. So you can actually reach the right professionals at the right time. And there's a bunch of them. There's something like 62 million over there right now. So organic content and all that stuff's great, but also LinkedIn ads are freaking amazing. Actually, they're working really well. There's targeting and all sorts of different things you can try over there. And what's really nice is we've secured some free credit for you to try. So you can try it out yourself. LinkedIn's actually offering a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit to launch your first campaign. So simply visit linkedin.com/flowchart. That's linkedin.com/flowchart. And terms and conditions apply, but go be quick, go check it out. Got nothing to lose. $100 free credit. Go test out some ads, see what you can do. All right, let's head over to the episode.
Luis, welcome to the show, man.
Guys, what's going on? Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, it's great talking. You speak our language. Well, A, podcasting, but B, growth of podcasts in cool, tricky, fun ways.
Yeah. We always like at the beginning of our show, we always like to try to like remember where, how we got connected, or, what the sort of path to this conversation was. And I think that actually I saw you maybe on either Twitter or Facebook. I don't remember which one, but it was on one of the social media platforms. You were out there talking about podcasting, and then I found your how to get 100,000 podcast downloads book, and I downloaded.
How to get your first 100,000.
How to get your first 100,000 downloads. I found that book, and I think I opted in for that. And then after I opted in for that, I was like, this guy's got some good stuff. Like there's some pretty good strategies in here that we haven't even thought about yet. So this is really awesome. I got to connect with this dude. And I think before I even emailed you emailed me to intro us to somebody. I think you emailed me and said, hey, I got somebody that I think it'd be really cool if you met. And I got that email and I'm like, yeah, I'd love to meet that person, but I actually really want to get you on the podcast.
Great minds.
I remember that email. Yeah. There's a funny story behind that email we can touch on later. But I have probably like you guys, I've got a Slack bot that tells me who opts into for that book.
Yep.
And I was like, oh man, Matt opted in because I was familiar with you before that. And I was like, oh, cool. Hope he likes it. And then the email. So yeah, I'm always trying to just spy on who's opting in. If I know them already, I try to reach out. So
I like that Slack bot idea because we do that for other things, but not for opt-ins really.
Yeah, we actually don't really pay attention to who's joining our list really.
Yeah.
But that's a good idea. I like that.
Or even paid subscribers, like a newsletter, like Slackbot. There you go.
Yeah. We do pay very, very close attention to who our customers are, but we haven't really paid a lot of attention to just the email opt-ins. I love it.
Right.
Yeah, man. Well, let's chat about let's figure out kind of a little behind the scenes of what got you to this point to releasing the book. You have your podcast agency. What kind of led you on this whole path?
It was it's I have no background in media. I didn't go to college for it. I didn't plan on this route when I came out of college. I was really, really into health and fitness, and I was a personal trainer before I was a podcast producer or podcaster at all. Mm-hmm. And what kind of led me on this path was, if you flash back to 2014, I was a junior in college, I was going to UCF down in Orlando. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I hated my major, and I hated what I was going to be going into, which was hospitality and restaurant management. And I was like, if I have to do this the rest of my life, I don't know. I might not suicidal, but I definitely won't be happy.
It's so fitting though in Orlando. It's like,
oh, dude, yeah, it was like one of the top hospitality schools, and I worked my butt off to get in there, and then I realized like this is not what I want to do.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So yeah, exactly. I was a night auditor, so I was literally up at night. I remember, I was a night auditor for a Marriott, one of the hotels over there. And I was like flipping through, I do my work, and then I would just flip through and like look at YouTube videos all night, bored out of my mind. So I was a trainer at that time. I realized I had to get out of this. So I was like, I love the gym, let me start training. And I realized really quick that there's a ceiling on how fast you can scale as a personal trainer. You can only train so many hours in the day.
Right.
And I was like, well, I know there's guys online doing this. So let me try and take my business online. So I probably played around with that for 2 years, dabbled and here and there.
Was that like a personal coaching online, or was it more like a broad strokes, like, hey, here's a bunch of training that you can do yourself?
I was trying to figure that out. So I was young and I didn't really know, still am young, but I didn't really know if I wanted to do like personal training one-on-one or info products. Didn't really know. And so I tried it all, to be honest with you. Yeah. And I had a really good mentor at the time. I was fortunate enough to run into, and this guy like changed my life. He actually said like, why don't you start a podcast? And I had never thought of that opportunity or possibility up until then. I'd listened to podcasts probably about a year in since before he said that. And that was my first kind of like aha moment. I was like, wow, because being online for up until that point, about a year or 2 years, I had tried to do blogging, not good at writing. Mm-hmm. I tried to do video editing was way too much, too expensive or too hard. But I was pretty good at talking. And I realized this just by going to like parties or going to, different types of meetups and things. I could talk to people. So podcasting was kind of like a natural fit for me. So I started a health and fitness podcast after about a month and like an $11 course on Udemy.
We've been there.
Yeah. Those courses are amazing. I'll tell you.
Yeah, they are.
For a great price.
It's a freaking bargain, actually.
Definitely undervalued. A lot of that content's way undervalued.
I don't know why no one's talking about Udemy anymore.
Yeah, I know. I ran into a guy who grew his podcast using Udemy. We can get into that later.
Oh yes, let's talk about that.
Make
that sounds
it
interesting.
Yeah, it's a really cool story. Cool. So bought the Udemy course, launched the podcast, started growing relatively fast. This was 2016 at the time, so podcasting wasn't as competitive, and realized that like this is actually fun. I can do it. Only thing that was killing me was kind of like the show notes and everything, doing all the back end stuff, right? That everyone hates doing. But I love the actual interviewing process of it.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got started into this. And then I did that for about 2 years. And then around 2017, I ran into a really big influencer who's in the fitness space. And I offered to help him with his podcast for free. And I worked my butt off for about 10 months and helped him grow his show from about 33,000 downloads to a month to about 110. And that's how I realized, like, oh, like this can actually be a business. And from then I've been growing the agency. So that's kind of how I got into it. The short story, at least.
Yeah. So
how I get into that.
With the business that you have now, the current agency, is the agency the done for you podcasting stuff, or is it an agency that will take an existing podcast and help scale it up?
So that's what I'm running into more and more. There's a lot of podcasters out there. The issue is, and this is what we're going to focus this call on, is how do you grow a podcast once you got it up off the ground?
Yeah.
So it is. Originally, I started just helping people get their show off the ground and then just helping them produce episodes, after that. Nowadays, it's more diving into with clients on one-on-one calls where we're looking at like how to grow, where are the issues, where's the audience dropping off, at what part of the show. So the agency, to answer your question, is nowadays mainly focused on helping people grow, but it started out kind of helping people just get started.
Gotcha. And it's such a needed thing too. Like there are a lot of agencies out there that will, do the editing and write your show notes and that kind of stuff. Yeah. It is next to impossible to find companies out there that specialize in growing your podcast for you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's not easy. And I think that's probably why, because it's not easy and it's never like it's always different depending on who the person is. So it's always kind of a custom thing. But it's funny though, because if you look at trying to grow a blog or YouTube channel, a lot of the same hacks and strategies will apply to podcasting if you kind of mirror them and tailor them to the podcasting medium. So whenever I looked at growing a show, I look at, I don't try to reinvent the wheel. I look at, what have people done to grow blogs? What have they done to grow Instagram channels? What have they done to grow Facebook pages? And a lot of those things will transfer over in some way or another.
Yeah.
So that's how I've always I've looked at it. Like, I don't try to reinvent the wheel. I'm like, people have done this before in other mediums. So how did they grow radio stations back in the day?
Yeah. I love that you're bringing it up in that format, or like you're like framing it as such, because a lot of folks that we've helped kickstart their podcasts or grow their podcasts, and just through advising and stuff, I feel like the label of a podcast, that it's different from a content, like a YouTube video or like you said, a blog post or whatever. It's just content at the end of the day. Yeah. So it's like we can really apply what grows, like during the blog movement when that was all the rage and starting up. Like, what were the things that, how was the trends? For one, you could look at like the market trends with that medium, but also you could look at all the different strategies that were used then and used now, and just apply it as this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because when I use that frame, one of the first things that came up in my head was like, when I started in blogging and I wanted to get my blog, I hit up a bunch of people who had blogs and asked if I could produce some content for them. And I was like, well, why can't that work in podcasting? And that's kind of how I got really into looking at like, well, how can I get on more podcasts, or how can I, provide value for someone so that they'll eventually come to me and say, hey, would you want to do a show with me?
Yep.
And that's kind of like the first thing I started with when it comes to helping people grow like a podcast. It's like, well, we need to get you out there on other shows.
Yeah. And that's perfect for everyone. Like any business, anyone listening can do that. And I think that's an important point is, we're talking about podcast growth and getting a podcast started, but you don't really need one you can still dip your toes into the whole medium by just guesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. There's so many people I've seen do that. Like, like book authors, when they have a new book, they go out and do this. The question is, how do they scale it and do 40 in a month?
Yeah,
I think that's the biggest question people want. It's like, how do I do a lot of these in a month or a couple months and really, really amplify instead of dripping it?
Yeah.
But you got to start somewhere.
And if you are going to do 40, you want them to sort of move the needle a little bit too, right? Because I mean, there's so many new podcasts starting up every single day that maybe don't even have any traction yet. So, I mean, I don't know your philosophies yet. We'll dig into it, but does it make sense to go on some of these newer podcasts when you're going on this like media blitz to get something out into the world? Because, maybe someday that podcast will be bigger and that content lives for kind of forever. Or does it make sense to sort of put all of your effort into only the ones that are going to move the needle like right now? And so that's sort of a thing that I think when we talk about the conversation of going on other podcasts, I think that's sort of the active debate that's always kind of going on is, should I just accept everything or should we only go on the ones that are going to really move the needle? So I'm kind of curious, what are your thoughts around that?
I think that's a great question. And that's something literally I've worked with people who have that rule, or have people who are like, I'll get on anything, just tell me where to go. And I think it really depends on how much, like how big you are, like what exactly do you have else to do? Like, is this your number one thing that you're doing right now in terms of marketing strategy? Or do you have other things that would be a more better use of your time? I think you had a friend of mine on here, Chris Guerrero, and a few episodes a little while back. And Chris is a guy that he's like super successful. He's got a great business. For him to go on a small podcast, it doesn't make sense. He could spend his time doing something else that's going to be more profitable. Right. So I think it comes down to the equation of like, which is going to be the best investment time for a guy like that. We can take Chris for an example. It makes sense for him to be on probably like the top 100 podcasts, maybe not the podcasts that are smaller, that don't have a big following, because he could spend a bunch of money on ads in that same hour and get his name out there way further. So a lot of it depends on what's the best use of that person's time.
What's your philosophy for yourself for going on podcasts?
For me, I am at a stage right now where I accept pretty much 95% of what comes through, because my goal is not just the interview is where it starts. The follow-up is where you'll make the lion's share of relationship revenue. The value of it is in the follow-up.
That right there is, I think the biggest point is the relationship.
Well, and also in Luis's specific scenario, his ideal client are those smaller podcasts that are kind of getting started up. So you're building a relationship with somebody that could potentially be a client of yours because you now know they have a podcast.
Right. That's one strategy. It's funny. So I worked with a guy who had helped. He had me build out like basically a flowchart of the follow-up system that would go down after a certain after he was on a podcast. So depending on what bucket that podcaster fell into, there's the follow-up sequence and how we kind of organized or orchestrated that relationship was different. So for example, if the person has a business you want to do a partnership with, there was a different set of follow-up events for that person. If the person was a really big influencer and maybe they just had a huge following on Instagram, or they had a huge email list, that's a different follow-up for that person. Or if the person's just a celebrity and you want them to give you a book recommendation, or you want you to do a testimonial for your upcoming book, that person had a different follow-up. So you can get really, really down the rabbit hole with this and kind of build out a flow chart of like, if I go on this kind of podcast, here's the kind of relationship that I want to have. And if it's this one, it's a different set of follow-up. So, I think it's almost like a sales follow-up.
It is. And you brought up a great point. And there's two things. So there's Well, first thing I wanted to say is Roland Frazier. He's one of the the owners of Digital Marketer, and he's been on the show a couple times. He made a comment. This was a little over a year ago, so I don't know if it's still totally true. But his philosophy, and his time is very valuable. He said he will go on any podcast because he sees that the potential of any show could become one of 100,000 downloads per month, and
right.
But I think what he also probably didn't say is the relationships. He's a very relationship guy, and that's how his currency is. Like he helps others grow. So
Right.
and that's one of the biggest things we find is I think there's maybe 5% of our guests actually follow up with us, like they have a plan to, and usually it's just a thanks. I've never heard of a flow like what you have there. I think it's freaking brilliant. We obviously do our follow-ups and a lot of podcasters don't even do that. So it's like, dude,
Right.
I don't
all
know
the
how many
values and follow-ups.
podcasts. Yeah, I don't know how many podcasts I've been on where the podcast went live, and I discovered that it went live like 2 months after it was live, and I was like, "Oh shit, I didn't even know that thing was on air yet."
Right.
Right. Like to me, I think that's one area where so many podcasters fall short. But I feel like that's sort of getting on a sort of off-topic tangent.
Well, but yeah, no, it's perfect here though, Luis. You're bringing up that every single person listening, it doesn't matter what niche you're in and what your goal is. If you just identify some really key shows, just use it as a conversation builder, relationship builder, and then actually follow up and have a plan.
Yeah.
And analyze the opportunity cost. Of
course.
Right? Like if there's higher leverage activities you can be doing with that time, then look at the opportunity cost always. Yeah.
True. And it's funny enough because sometimes I'll speak with people and they're like, I just don't know where to start. Like, how do I find the podcast? How do I talk to them, reach out to them? This is crazy because I didn't even think of this, but I was in a mastermind here in Austin. It was a think tank with David Gonzalez and a couple weeks ago. And this guy, I forget his name, he was there and he was like, he showed how he got on the top 10 podcasts in his space. I think he was in the business space. And what he did is he looked at the top 10 podcasts at the time, a couple of years ago when he was launching his book. And he scrolled down all of the episodes and he looked for mutual contacts. He's like, oh, I know that guy. Oh, I know that person. He reached out to all those people, asked for a connection or introduction to the podcaster, and got on all 10 of those podcasts like that.
I believe it.
I was like, wow. Like, see, it's simple. It's as simple as that. Like, you could literally go through the person's, like if I wanted to meet you, Joe, or you, Matt, and like, I didn't know you guys, I could either go through your podcast and ask for mutual connection, or I could go on Facebook and say, okay, if he's got like, he knows David, I know David, I can ask for a mutual introduction.
Yeah,
for sure.
Oh, that's so smart. Now, I'm curious though, how does that interaction go from there? Because I know, depending on the level you're at, I almost feel like you might kind of get filtered out by gatekeepers if you're not quite established enough. Like, how do you sort of get past gatekeepers, and how do you actually get somebody enticed to bring you onto their show?
It's a great question. I think for me, it always comes down to, I've got to know what this guy or gal wants. I have to know, are they launching a book? Are they launching a new company? Is there podcast? What are they looking for in their podcast? So it comes down for me knowing what that person wants. So for example, we had a client, this was way back when I was first getting started. I had a client who was in the health and fitness space, and he wanted to get on some bigger health and fitness podcasts. Now his podcast was okay, but his YouTube channel was huge. It had over 300,000 subscribers. And I knew of a podcast that was in the top 5 in the health and fitness space, and they were just starting their YouTube channel. So I reached out to the podcasters and said, hey, like, we'd love to do a cross interview with this person, because I knew like my client had the big YouTube following, they didn't, but they have a big podcast following. So it's kind of an equal fit. We kind of both had what the other person wanted. So for that, like how I figured that out was I was listening to their podcast, and I just realized that what they wanted was something I could provide. So you kind of gotta, it may not always happen like right off the bat. You kind of have to listen for it, and you have to keep your eyes open and like kind of stalk the person. Essentially.
I mean, it's the same kind of stuff that we do for getting high level guests, like totally. And people that aren't really in our network. Like one example was Mike Dillard we had on the show, and we didn't really have a great connection. We got introed, but at the same time we had a reason why we wanted him on the show, and he was like out of the limelight for a year plus, wasn't doing any kind of interviews, but we said why specifically we wanted him on and how it related to what we're doing, our lives and all that. And he hopped on. He was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And it's just
we found the topic that he was really, really hot and passionate on in that moment. Outside of, I mean, it impacted his business, but it was a topic that wasn't necessarily a business topic, and we knew he was passionate about it right now, and that was our way in, and we got connected, and now we actually stay in touch with him. So
that's really cool. So you had specificity.
Yep.
It's just like marketing. It's like specificity will help. Will really help convert that person from like a no, like I don't want to talk with you for an hour to like, oh yeah, we can definitely talk about that because you went the extra mile and get specific with it. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, and that was the combo of actually what you said. So get intros. So we got an intro, which gets you usually past the gatekeepers. There might still be an assistant involved. That's how we got Dave Asprey on as well. It's like, got an intro, but then even talking to an assistant, there was some specificity, and we had it was like a combo. I feel like a good combo approach will make it happen most cases.
Throughout the course of this conversation, I think you mentioned before we hit record that there's a lot of people that do this stuff in San Diego, and I think almost everybody that we've mentioned so far is out in Austin. So I'm like
Dave Asprey now.
Right. Dave Asprey's not in Austin? I thought he was.
He has like labs. Oh, you are, yeah.
No, yeah, you're in Austin, but I think we mentioned Mike Dillard, and then the person that we got connected to Mike Dillard was a guy named Kurt Molly, who you probably know. So it's just it's
Austin
interesting.
Crew.
There's a big crew out there in Austin too.
I'm telling you, Austin and San Diego. It's the reason why I moved here. Honestly, it's because it's the middle of this country. It's plenty of people here, so
tax stuff is pretty good.
Better than
Texas,
better than California. That's for sure.
I know.
Oh yeah.
Hey, trust us. If we didn't have all of our family, if we didn't grow up in San Diego, we'd definitely be looking at some options.
Yeah,
Austin's on the top of the list.
Yeah, you guys are welcome to come. I hear about every time I go there. I hear new tax laws being raised. I'm just like, how is there no? It's beautiful, but how are you guys living here?
I know. I hear you, man. All right, so I mean, some more. Are there any other strategies you'd recommend? Say podcast guesting. I think that's the big thing. Is how do you get on shows? That's the question that we get all the time. So I think we pretty much answered that here. It's not rocket science. Just make some connections, do your homework, and then show up with value that serves their audience.
And we've all seen this, all three of us here. We've all been on the wrong side of really shitty outreach emails, right? So like we get these emails that are like, hey, Matt from Hustle and Flowchart, I was listening to your podcast episode, and then they paste a link in there. I think this person would be a great fit for your show, signature, right? Like we've all gotten those really, really crappy pitches. When somebody's trying to get onto a podcast, do you have any feedback that you give them on here's how you should structure? I mean, it sounds like a lot of what you're doing is networking and sort of getting somebody else to make the intro. But then once you've actually gotten that intro, what's some of the advice you give people to like follow up and actually make it happen?
So I think what you just said there, the follow-up is key. Because if the follow-up, like, and I don't mean follow up once or twice, I mean follow up like 7, 8, or 9 times. For me, that's been a huge key. Even when I pitch cold, like if I'm pitching a client to somebody else I don't even know, we have like a seven step kind of 7 emails that go out scheduled. So that's number one. Like, don't be afraid. If they don't reply 3 times, that's fine. They're podcasters. They're always going to need content. So I don't really mind a no, because I know they're going to be, if they're still producing in a month or 2 from now, they still need content for next week. Yeah. So it doesn't really bother me. So that's the first thing, is like you have to be ready to follow up multiple times. Besides that, when it comes to pitching and kind of getting the interview, I think it takes, like you were saying before, it takes research. Like you have to know, you have to prove a couple things. Number 1, I know your audience. Number 2, I know what you want. And then number 3, I can help you grow your podcast. Because like we just discussed, podcasters want to grow their show. It's like the number 1 thing. So if you're a guest coming on, if you've got an email list of 10,000 people, I would put in that email, hey, I'm going to promote your podcast to my 10,000 email subscribers. Or you can kind of be creative and say, hey, like every podcast I get on, we run $50 with an ad spend on Facebook, and to promote the show and to help the host as a thank you for having me on. So I think it really comes down to creativity. How can you help that person grow their podcast? You can leverage your Facebook, your Instagram account. You can leverage paid ads. You can leverage your YouTube channel. You can do all these kind of things. And the same thing goes for the host, right? You can get creative with how you can show value. So I think and that's something that nobody else is really doing right there is if you're a guest coming on, it's like, well, how can they're not showing how they can help a podcaster grow their podcast outside of just giving great content, which I know a lot of people can do. But if you can show them numbers and like, hey, I'm going to promote you to my 36,000 followers on Instagram and send traffic to your podcast, I think that's a stronger lead-in for most people.
Yeah, so basically show them that you've done your research, you know their audience, you know what kind of things they want to talk about, you know what they're looking for, but also you're willing to do the thing that they probably are looking for the most, which is help them get more awareness on what they're doing and their show and that sort of thing.
So that's it's funny because all the people that we get pitched to us, maybe again 5% or so actually put that in there. Most it might even be less than that, but that's the common feedback is like, hey, get very specific with what it is and then even come with a handful of topics that relate to our audience and be very specific around those as well, so we don't have to search and wonder how are you going to fit into the show.
Yeah, don't make the podcast that you're trying to do the work for you, right? Like don't pitch us and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show, and then make us do research to figure out who the hell you are.
Pretty much.
Right. It needs to be a very clear reason why they would have you on your show. Like, I only talk about podcasting.
Right.
Yeah.
So
right.
I'm not gonna talk about anything else but podcasting. So yeah, I try to stay in my lane in that regard.
Yeah.
And the same thing with most people, it's I can tell you some horror stories of getting pitched for podcasts. What are we gonna talk about? I don't even know you.
We'll just say don't be that guy. Just be a good human, do your research, and just know that don't be a pest.
So one thing that I know comes up for us is because we're doing the podcast and because we're trying to get on a lot of podcasts, there's a lot of connections and a lot of people and a lot of things that we've got to remember to follow up on and things like that. Are you using any sort of tools or automations or contact management or any sort of systems like that to kind of keep it all straight?
Great question. So there's two things I'll note here. One, I have a Google Sheets document that it's called a connection document. And when I have someone who's new in my world and I want to add instant value to them, I have a list of all the podcasters or all the people I know with a show or a platform, and I have them on that list. And those will be in the columns on the top, going from left to right. And then I'll put the person's name on the left side, and then I'll run across my finger, who can I connect with them with? It's like Matt, Joe, James, Rick, yes, no, and I'll usually come out there with like 4 or 5 names, like, oh, this person would be great for that podcast. Let me go make some introductions. And then I have a copy paste introduction template that I give to my assistant. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like it needs to be kind of massaged a little bit for every person. But that's one tool I use for keeping up with all the connections I have, because there's tons of podcasters in my network, and same thing with you guys, right? There's a bunch of people, who you could potentially connect with. So that's one thing I do. And that's usually for like any kind of business relationship or new clients or anything like that. We'll use that connection document. The second one I'm using now is called Airtable. And Airtable specifically hooked up with Zapier. It's, for me, I don't know if you guys have used Airtable before, but it's like Google Sheet. Okay. It's like Google Sheets on steroids. It's pretty cool.
So what are you doing with Zapier there?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually using Airtable in the same way. We use it for a lot of our contact management, and also our release calendar for our podcast is all built into Airtable, because you can just pump so much data into it and still have it look organized.
Right. Yeah. So right now we're automating a lot of our email follow-up with that. So whenever we need to pitch people, we have the sequence automated on there. And it's really just plug in a couple of different details, a couple of different dates. And then you can schedule out, like I could schedule out 6 months of follow-up if I wanted to get on 40 podcasts.
Really? I didn't know you could do that. Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. The key though, I've found is like, the good thing about it is that you can scale your pitching, right? So if you had 40 emails and 40 names and you knew kind of the details, or you could pay someone to do the research, right? You could essentially be pitched on 40 podcasts today. Which is cool. So that's what we're using it for right now. The biggest thing is you have to know the person, you have to know what they want, and then follow up comes in huge in that part. 'Cause
Yeah,
people are just, so.
it's like you still got to do the front work that we were talking about, which is still,
Right.
approach it with it level-headed and connections and
Yeah.
all that stuff. But then, it's the follow-up that, everyone typically has an issue with unless there's a good system behind the scenes.
Exactly, and that's the issue. I get people pitch me all the time. I never really respond until 2 or 3 times in.
Sure, same.
Okay.
Dude, as a podcaster, you get swamped by these things every day.
Oh, I really appreciate it when people bump the thread back up to the top of my Gmail. Like if somebody reaches out, a lot of times it'll kind of fall into the
Ether.
the ether of my inbox. I'm actually pretty clean with my inbox, but sometimes stuff falls through the cracks, or I'll leave it in my inbox thinking, okay, I'm going to respond to this person next week, and kind of falls out of my radar, and then they bump it, and I go, oh yeah, I was going to reply to that person. And so I actually appreciate the bumping. I just I can't stand it when it's like the sort of no thought went into it. I can't stand it when somebody emails like a copy and pasted template that you can tell they didn't even tweak it for me, and then they have some sort of automated follow-up system that just says, want to make sure you saw that, and then 2 days later, hey, want to make sure you saw that.
You're like, come on, you lazy ass. Put some thought behind it.
I don't mind the automation. I hate the laziness of it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the issue you'll run into. It was funny though. I found like, you're right. I have a lot of people who the second email, for some reason, we have a follow up, and unfortunately it's a lazy follow up. I'll be honest with you, Joe, but or Matt, I'll be like, I'll tell you right now. It's the subject line is like little nudge, and then like a smiley face, and it's like, hey,
That's
name, just making sure. What was it? Just a friendly nudge on this. Did you see so and so? Hope you're having an awesome day, Lewis. And it works so many times. Like I get so many responses off of that.
Yeah, but I'm sure the first email, the initial one that you sent, it actually had some value to it.
Oh yeah, exactly. That thing goes in deep, and that's private. They're like, they missed that, and they're like, oh yeah, this person tried. Okay, cool.
No, seriously, that follow up, that's a great example. I do very similar things. It's just like a couple lines. You don't need to have a whole another paragraph pitch. It's like, we're all busy. We're all fucking flooded with emails. Like, just help them out.
Well, Neville Medora. So I was talking to him on an old podcast that I had, and he actually, what he does is he literally just writes the word bump. He just writes bump and then sends it again, and it bumps it to the top of the person's inbox.
Cuts right to it.
And he said that it's been super effective for getting him replies.
I love it.
I mean, love it. Dude, there's no emotion in there. We're just like trying to get shit done. It's like, hey, bump. If you ignore it, okay, bump.
I love that.
Yeah,
that's cool. Another Austin name.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And I briefly met him at that mastermind or that think tank I was at a couple weeks ago, and such a smart guy. And I've been following his blog for years, so I'm a huge Neville Medora fan. To keep going here with the growth strategies, the second thing I see that is a huge thing, something that's huge that no one's really doing, is I think you guys are doing it too. So kudos to you guys. You're pretty ahead of the game here. It's creating really high value lead magnets with your podcast content, and then taking that content and running paid traffic against it.
Mm-hmm. We do those both. Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing. It's a lot of people are sitting on hundreds of episodes, or they have tons of great stuff in there, but no one's taking it apart and turning it into a high value lead magnet or something else, a training or something, and then putting it against paid ads, and then having people opt in for that and then click through to the podcast.
So what are some good examples that you can give us on that?
Yeah. So Russell Brunson does a good job with this. If you type in Russell Brunson binge guide podcast, that should come up. You find his funnel, and basically it's a ClickFunnels page. Enter your name and email, and he sends you like a PDF of all like the highlights from every single episode he's done on his Marketing in Your Car. I think it's Marketing in Your Car podcast.
Yeah, I think so.
And the links go straight to the podcast. So now with that strategy, you can easily get the podcast on paid traffic and running it relatively cheap, because you're just getting people to opt in. You're not like, it's not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So, and then besides that, you can retarget them with the Facebook pixel. So you can make it look like audience and scale that. So, that's the second thing I'd say. Because you don't need to have a guesting, an interview show or anything else special. Just take your content, repackage it,
Yeah. I mean, so what we're doing with ours is every single episode that we do, somebody on our team is listening through it and taking notes on it. Not like show notes that sort of tease out the episode that are kind of designed to make you listen. These are actual like notes on everything we talked about and any sort of strategies or tactics or anything like that. They take those notes and then we make those notes available for each episode through opting in. But then what we do to sort of further extrapolate on that model is that the notes are only available for 2 weeks from the time that episode goes live, and then they kind of get locked into a vault, and then the vault is our monthly recurring revenue business model. So all of this audio content that we're making gets repurposed into the thing that you're opting in for, and then all of this audio content that you're making also gets repurposed into the thing that you're buying from us if you want that sort of shortcut cheat sheet in the future for some of these episodes. Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if you guys have tested this, but I've seen some other podcasters. Well, they'll take a 5-minute clip that's like not recorded or not like it's bonus content. Essentially, it's kind of like what's your number one strategy, and then they do a 5-minute session on that. They don't publish that on the podcast. They just talk about it and say, hey, if you want the 5-minute session that Lewis did or so and so did on growth strategies, hop in the monthly membership, and it's there in the vault. Yeah, so that's I've seen a lot of people other people do that.
So a similar approach that we do on that front, which doesn't happen with every guest, is that we'll actually follow up with them, which you'll probably get this follow up from us, is basically offering like, hey, do you want to create some like a quick, 10, 15 minute piece of content that can live in our members area? And that could be like video content explaining a specific, process, kind of like what you're saying there.
Right.
And same idea.
Now, when you booked in to be on our podcast, did you see the link? I think it goes out in one of our follow-up emails that it's kind of like a, hey, here's what to expect from the podcast kind of page. And
I did. I didn't see the page. I saw the it was like a Calendly email.
Yeah, so there's a Calendly email that goes out, and there's actually a link in the email. When you click on it, it actually goes to a video of me and Joe talking and saying, hey, we're looking forward to having you on the podcast. Here's some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. And we kind of just have like a fun little video of just us holding up the iPhone talking. But then if you scroll down the page a little bit, it actually says, oh, by the way, do you want additional exposure? To get additional exposure, we invite you to create an extra piece of content that we can put in front of our paid customers inside of our members area. So we're actually, even before people come on the episode, sort of sending them to a page that says, and we actually set this up not too long ago, so you may have actually booked in before this was actually implemented. But we're actually asking people about this now before they even come on the show.
I like it. That's really good. That's a great pre-frame. And most people will do it, I'm sure. That way you have exclusive content.
Yep.
I like that. That's the first time I've seen people do that. I think we I when I first got started in this, one of the guys I modeled was Chris Larson. Chris Larson? Yeah, from Expert. He's one of Russell Brunson's mentees, but he's got a similar thing, not for guests, but for him getting on podcasts. So he's got like a really simple video that's like, hey, here's my kind of like, here I do podcast interviews like every Tuesday. And you can book in here. They're only 30 minutes. Here's what to expect. And then just make sure you send me the link. Cause he has tons of people, probably similar to you guys. He has a ton of people who want you on their podcasts. And if you're open to going on a bunch of them or taking anyone, you can have kind of like an evergreen process that has people booking themselves in for you to be on their podcast. So a similar thing. I'll send you the link to it later. We can link to it.
Yeah, I'd love to see what that looks like.
Yeah, just to visualize it, that might help. Cool. Yeah, we'll link that in the show notes.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I actually, so I want to step back a little bit, and I want to circle back around to some more like growth strategies for the podcast. But before I do, I actually want to go back real quick to talking about being on other podcasts, because there's one last thing I want to touch on there, and that's how do we maximize the value of being on that podcast? Like, how do we actually get people from the podcast to take action and start following us? You know what I mean? Question. Like, because a lot of people, they're like, we do a lot of interviews where at the end we'll say, hey, where do you want to send people after listening to this episode? And they go, check me out on Facebook, right? Like, that's not going to get them too far. And so I'm curious, what do you advise that people do when going on podcasts?
That's a great question, because that's like the conversion piece. So I know you guys have like the Textful link, which is awesome. I think that's one great way to do it, where you're offering, like I always offer my free book, like my book. I have like a paid version, I have a free version. I give the free version away. And that's kind of like, I send people to the same page. So that's usually what I recommend. Like, you've got to have some kind of really high value lead magnet. And if you want, you can put some kind of time barrier on it. Like, hey, we're going to, if you're listening to this now, we'll have this page open for the first 60 days. And it's going to be all of my top books that I've written, all for free for the, Evergreen Profits podcast listeners. So I think you have to have, like, first of all, don't send them to like 20 different links, like you guys know. Don't send them to Facebook or any other social media. You want to send them to a landing page.
Right. You want to get that email.
What's that?
You want to get that email. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can retarget them, and, you can do a lot of other things with the text. So it's definitely got to be, and nowadays, not even so much a book, like it needs to be like a cheat sheet. Because no one reads my book. Matt, you're one of the few people who read it. Like most people read like 4 pages and they're like, oh, this is a good book. Cool. So nowadays it's probably like a cheat sheet. And I think that's where it comes down to, where you can, if you're a guest and you're controlling the narrative and you talk about, tax saving strategies, and then you have a really congruent tax saving strategies checklist at the end, that's where it's really, really smart. So as a guest, like you were saying before, being able to recommend specific topics, like here's what I can talk about. And then ideally, if you had like maybe, let's just say 3 different topics you could talk about, you ideally would have a lead magnet for each 3 of those that is really congruent, and it makes perfect sense for someone who's listening to that podcast, that there's no reason why they shouldn't go and get the cheat sheet or the script. Yeah. So that's my strategy when it comes to converting people from.
And I totally agree. I think that's pretty close to our strategy. I think the one element that's a little tweaked on ours is that we create a sort of unique link for every episode, so we actually can tell how effective each episode we've been on was for us. But I can see how that could be a huge pain in the ass if you're trying to be on like 40 shows a month. Right. We're only really going on, like, I think we do about 4 shows a month, and that's like split between us. Like I'll do 2 and Joe will do 2. So, it's really not that much extra effort to just clone a page and change some of the wording on the page for us. But that's the one slight variation that we do, is we are kind of creating a unique page for every show we went on, just so we can sort of see the effectiveness. And if people
personalizes it too, so we'll put the show name in there so it can address the actual podcast listener.
Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, it'll say like, thanks for being on the Super Fast Business, or listening to us on Super Fast Business with James Schramko. Hopefully you loved it. Here's the freebie, right? So we kind of, we tailor it to it. I think it probably helps with conversions a little bit. But then also we can go look in our back end stats and go, oh, that podcast really moved the needle. This one didn't really move the needle. And if something really moved the needle, then we're probably going to follow up with that person and be like, hey, you ready for a round 2?
Yeah. That's I think Tom Schwab. I interviewed him about a year ago. He said him and his team do that too.
Interview Valet.
If you have the exactly. Interview Valet is his company. If you have the bandwidth, that's definitely a good strategy. So yeah, I find most people don't, unlike you guys, but that's a great way to customize it. Do you just put the name? Like you put the artwork there, or just the name of the show?
No, we don't put the artwork or anything. It's just the name of the show and the name of the host. Those are the only 2 things we swap out.
Okay.
I think we tried the artwork for a little bit, but we're like, it's just too much effort.
Yeah.
A lot of things.
Okay, I was wondering why, because I figured that could be it. But okay.
It would help though, for sure.
I'm sure it would improve conversions even more. But I actually ran a split test using Visual Website Optimizer, where we were driving traffic to these landing pages. One actually had the show notes image on it, and one didn't have the cover image on it, and one didn't have the cover image for the show. And the difference in conversion rate was so minimal that it wasn't worth the extra 5 minutes that it takes to do that for every show that we're on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm assuming it's going to takes a lot of time if you're doing a 4 or 5 a month, 4 different landing pages a month. Yeah, opt-in. So
for sure,
makes a ton of sense. One question for you guys is, have you guys done anything with other or reached out to any directories, like podcast directories? Ask for
Directories?
promo.
No, actually.
Well, sort of. Are you talking about like apps like Overcast and Castro and Podcast Republic and stuff like that? Yeah. So we've advertised in all of those. And then we've advertised in some other ones too that actually had to sign NDAs. And if you've done it, then you probably know which ones I'm talking about. But some of them actually require you to sign NDAs before they'll actually allow you to buy ad space, because I think they're sort of under the radar and some of their users don't realize that they're actually ads. So there's some, yes, we have experimented with that. But I'm curious where you were going to go with that.
There's a couple of them. I know for sure there's always a free route where you can do, like, you can pitch them and say, hey, like, you know, you can ask what are their considerations or what are their criteria for getting featured on like the front page, you know. So that's one route. And I will the top ones I've found success for are Podbean, places like Podchaser. I know Deezer and Castro's also have like the free route, and then like what you guys are saying, also there's a paid route to that too, where you can ask them, you know, if like what's like kind of like their paid strategy or what do they use, what can you do with them. For that, like the easiest one I would say for most people, right, is Overcast, where you can basically buy impressions, you know, for a month. For me, I don't know about you, I haven't found too much success in that though. I find those people don't stay long.
Yeah, with Overcast, so our experience, we've run ads on Overcast for about 4 or 5 months, not simultaneously. They kind of, you know, we skip months here and there, but we've done it about 4 or 5 times. When we first did it was probably 2 years ago, and it was actually ultra effective. We paid about $1 per subscriber.
It's very cheap then too.
And yeah, I think in the business category, it costs, I think, $300 for the month. Oh, wow. Now I think it's upwards of $1,000 for the month. So it was a different time the first time we tried it, but then each subsequent time that we tried it, the effectiveness just went down and down and down and down until we just stopped doing it with Overcast.
Yeah. That's exactly what I found too. It's like, it's a great way to start, but you'll get a lot of impressions, but the subscribers won't stick. So yeah, that's, I was wondering to see if you guys had a different,
we've had, I mean, the NDA one that we're not allowed to technically talk about, those people have actually stuck.
Yeah, those people have been around for like
time.
A year. Well, yeah, I think we ran that promo in March of last year. So it's been about a year, and it's still our second most played app. And I wish we could talk about it publicly, but I don't want to like talk about something that we have an NDA of on the podcast.
But no, so I mean, they're not all created equal, which is really cool. And Overcast, I mean, who knows? Like, it's a great app. We love it and using it, but maybe, I don't know, something there.
Yeah.
But I've done a lot of, actually, I have done outreach to specific. I don't think it's Podbean or Podchaser or them, but definitely all the podcast apps. That's something I've done before, is basically reached out to their support or whoever contact I could find and be like, hey, how can I be more visible on your platform? Right. And typically they'll let you know what I've found. There's paid options. There's definitely like almost a contest where they choose one every month, and it's like, hey, submit your guide or your show here, and maybe we'll pick you. And then sometimes they'll just feature you, and because they want to try it out. So you never know what you're going to get, really.
There's that's a really good idea. I haven't tried this. The apps, funny enough, I get pitched a lot of times by podcast app creators that want feedback on their new app, which is cool. But that's a great point. Have you guys heard of podcastdelivery.com?
No,
that's a new one to us.
That's I'll send you the link. We'll link it in the show notes as well. So basically it's a recommendation email list where they have a bunch of people on the podcast, who are podcast listeners and fans, and you can pay to be one of their recommendations for the week. I think it's basically how it goes. How it's pitched, like you're sponsoring them, like you're a sponsor for that email of the week. So that's kind of a new thing when it comes to discovery that I found. I haven't tested it yet, but it's something that's been on the radar. Yeah. And there's a couple other ones like that do this stuff where they're basically like a news site for podcasts, and they have a bunch of followers who are interested.
Yeah, we've done some stuff with podnews.net. James Creedland. We actually reached out to him once because we had a podcast episode where we talked about podcasting strategies, not unsimilar to this episode, and reached out to him and said, hey, we just did an episode with a whole bunch of growth strategies around podcasting. Would you mind featuring it in the newsletter? And he replied and I think basically said, I'll do it this one time, but next time consider buying advertising. So we actually got him to do the first promo for free, and we actually haven't tested the advertising since.
Yeah.
So we'll have to try that next.
And really, it sounds like a lot of what we do and a lot of what you're suggesting, Luis, is really it's like integration marketing.
Yeah.
It's like how do we go into the pool of podcast listeners where they already live, they're already used to using an app or listening, and then just figure out how to show up in front of those folks. Like we had Jordan Harbinger on the show, I don't know, a month or two ago. And we asked him, I mean, the dude makes like 6 million downloads a month or something. Ridiculous. And he says he wants to grow a show. And we're like, how are you going to do that? Like, what are your strategies? And it was off air. And it was basically working with other podcasts to, essentially, I don't know if I'm allowed to totally say, I don't know. Basically, it's just show up on other shows, episode swaps and things like that.
The stuff that works, the stuff we're talking about on a small scale is pretty much the same stuff he's trying to do, just on a larger scale. Yeah,
but the key there is he's not like doing a bunch of little things. He's identified where he can just show up in someone else's feed, essentially, or pay for a sponsored spot on someone else's show that's like his audience already. So it's something to think about.
Yeah. Right. Kind of like an organic sponsorship. Campaign where you're reaching out. It's funny enough, I had one of our clients, he has a show that's pretty darn big. It gets around 10 to 15,000 downloads per episode. And there are some networks that were actually pitching him to pay him to do a host read ad for their new podcast. So if it's another strategy there, like you were saying, Joe. Was it Joe?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was Joe.
Okay.
Good job. Our voices sound kind of similar on the mics.
There's no audio. There's no video here, so I'm guessing on the fly. You can, so someone listening out there, it's true. Like if you have the money and the budget and you want to grow, it's like you could literally reach out to people in your space. Go to chartable.com and look at the top shows in your category and pitch them. Say, hey, would you do I'll pay you $100, $200 to do like a little 15-second host read. I'll provide the script for you and let's run it for 4 episodes or, hey, name your price. So that's like a very organic way to do paid ads or paid sponsorships.
From your experience doing that kind of thing, what has sort of been the price range that other podcasts are willing to do that at?
It's a great question. It depends how big they are and if they already have sponsorship. So if you're going to do this, it's going to be someone you want to do with someone who doesn't have ads already. Because if they have ads, they're like, that's a sponsorship. Here's my my sponsorship page. You can learn all about it.
Right.
But for somebody who doesn't do it, it really just depends on like how much money they make for the podcast or what their goals are with the podcast. Like some people, like my client, like he doesn't really care. He's not doing it for money. So he's not doing it for them. He didn't offer. But the offer, like the going rate could easily be anywhere from like $300 to $500 for 4 episodes.
Oh,
I would say start with that and then move on up,
because that's probably not going for like top 10 in the business category because most of those probably already have sponsors and the opportunity cost is too high for them to do something like that.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they probably lose their sponsors. So you want to aim for people who don't have sponsorships already, but are already growing and they're big and they've got a relevant audience. Doesn't have to be a terribly huge show, but it can be someone like really, like if they're talking about the exact same thing you're doing, you could always reach out to them like that or invite them on your podcast, build a relationship, and then at the end you guys could talk about that. I think that's probably a better way to do it. That way you've already built some equity with them, and then you're not just pitching them.
Well, you brought up a good point too, is that not all shows are created equal. Like the smallest shows, like our buddy Steve Olsher, he has a handful of shows, and he admitted, I mean, it was in one of his conferences, like he doesn't get a lot of downloads, but with the amount of downloads he has, he's able to fill a room in a physical location of like hundreds of people and, you know, sell high ticket stuff, but he's basically squeezing everything he can out of that lemon. And basically he's making the most out of it. So that means that that's a loyal following that's listening to what he says. So if you can identify a show, pay him $300 to $500, like, dude, and they're pitching you as like a really, you know, a solid resource to check out, they'll probably take action.
Exactly. And there's studies that show, and I'll have to do some digging, give you guys the like the articles and stuff that I found this on, but the host reads, obviously the host reads do way better than if some kind of like programmed in pre-roll ad or anything like that. So because you're getting a recommendation from a source you already trust. Right. The host is someone who's a trusted icon in the person's eyes, in the listener's eyes. So that's another thing to consider when you're doing host reads. Like they're more effective than your normal sponsorship role.
You're right.
That's, I mean, it's something we haven't tried yet. We've been on this end of it where people pay us to, you know, we have sponsors on this show, but we've never been on the end of actually paying other people, you know, for us to be, I don't know.
Sponsor other shows.
Yeah, sponsor other shows. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, for whatever reason, my brain couldn't put that together. So I'm curious, of the various like growth strategies that you've tested, what's sort of been the most impactful outside of going on other people's shows? What seems to move the needle the most that you've seen?
I would say, if I would actually, it's one of the things I want to, before I answer that, talk about the sponsorship thing. To end off that, don't just limit yourself to sponsoring podcasts. Consider sponsoring Facebook groups, email lists, YouTube channels. All those are fair game.
Yeah.
So just keep that open.
I love that. And just to add to that point, we actually had these guys that they do the Optimal Living Daily podcast. Justin and Lee. They came on and we asked them what was the thing that sort of had the biggest impact on their podcast, what moved the needle the most. And it was actually two different YouTubers that were in the makeup industry. They do like makeup tutorials, actually shouting out their podcast. And he said that sort of blew up their podcast overnight. Just two YouTubers who do makeup tutorials.
They were saying, I guess, like there's a thing with a lot of those YouTubers in makeup specifically. They'll talk about business. They'll talk about all these different things that just happen. And I guess it's like their favorite things. And they just got mentioned as one of the favorite things of that week. And boom, just exploded the podcast. They're like, okie dokie. Never thought that was going to happen, but okay.
Right. It's some weird stuff. Like, to answer your question, Joe, it was, Matt. It's
you're good at this, man. Everyone jacks it up.
Yeah, most people don't actually get to distinguish between us before the end of the episode.
I'm glad I did better than the average then.
Yeah, you definitely did.
I think for me, it's been shout outs on like big Facebook groups. So I've had some buddies on my show who had bigger Facebook groups, like 10 to 15,000 people, and they'll post the episode in there. And those have been my best episodes when people shout me out in their community, whether it's like a Facebook group or an email list or mastermind. But what I found is Facebook groups with like really highly engaged audiences.
I think I already know what your answer to this is going to be, but I'm going to ask anyway. Do you know of any way to sort of engineer that and, you know, sort of get on more Facebook groups?
Oh man, I think it comes down to a lot of research. And I actually had a little bit of a training on this. My coach had a training on this that I really loved when he was sharing exactly how he gets in with like big Facebook groups. You have to look at what are they offering, and is what you're offering competitive or complementary? If it's complementary, then it can be, you guys can probably do some kind of cool JV or some kind of cool swap, whether like you do an interview in their Facebook group and they do a podcast interview for you. So looking at, like, I would look at complementary products and complementary services or people out there that kind of run parallel to you and don't really clash. So that's probably number one for engineering that. And then number two is similarity in an audience size. So it's like, if they have 5,000 people in their group, do you have 5,000 downloads a month? Or per episode, can you command a similar number? I think those are two big things. When it comes to that kind of thing.
I could see that.
Yeah.
And I was just getting the ideas from Facebook groups. I'm like, there's probably a lot of Facebook groups that our guests typically have, or they have some following, some maybe a YouTube channel. It's like you can obviously entice them to and give them all the materials. I know you have some stuff in your book about this to get them to share it. But being even very specific and offering, hey, I'm down to pay you some money too if you want to share that with the entire group, like, approaching like Dave Asprey's people. When I mean, that might probably be a long shot, but at the same time, it's like, hey, he could share, bulletproof their story on our podcast. If we pay him some money, well, shit, that could be a big growth lever right there for us.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And you get the rapport already a little bit too.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So.
And the last thing I'll say here, I know we didn't talk about this, but contests and different type of giveaways. Those are fun, and those we've seen some success with that in terms of, especially with growing an email list. Those have been really effective.
Yeah. What sort of giveaways have you done? Like what sort of prizes? Because I know when it comes to giveaways, I think relevancy is kind of key. We've done some giveaways in the past where we got a bunch of people to, join our list and follow us on Twitter or whatever. I don't even remember all the criteria that we asked for, but if it's something like, okay, we're going to give you an iPad, it's so broad, everybody wants an iPad, that you're just getting a crap ton of people enter your contest. They're just totally unqualified.
Yeah. Yeah. So relevancy is super important. Give different ideas. We've given away retreats, given away different types of supplements and protein supplements, health and fitness supplements, whether it's like a detox or something, giving away different types of event tickets. I like event tickets personally and retreats because then there's opportunity to build a relationship with that person, especially if they're in your world.
Yeah.
And they're probably a potential buyer anyways. It's great because
that's a good idea. I like that.
Upsold into something else. They got there for free, So
it's a good way to fill a room when it's already hard enough to fill a room. You might as well give it away.
We even have event tickets available to us. We should do that now.
I love that. I love that concept. Actually, yeah, we should do that.
You guys should do a giveaway for Evergreen Profits Live.
Yeah,
I love that.
Seriously.
Well, I mean, we're speaking on some stages. We're speaking at TNC and PodFest and a handful of other things throughout the upcoming year. And when you go and speak at these places, a lot of times they'll give you an allotment and say, if you want to invite a couple people, we're going to give you a few extra tickets that you can give away. And so we have a handful of those tickets still. And
Could even be discounts. It's like, discounted tickets. Like, yeah, we'll invest in that if we get you out there.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really smart way to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So giveaways. Yeah. I think retreats, maybe sometimes one-on-one calls as well will work if your audience really loves you and you can do one-on-one calls, 3 or 4, and you have something to offer them of value, maybe afterwards, or maybe you just give them some access to some free stuff, courses as well. I've seen people give away courses. Yeah. So it's a very wide spectrum. I would just say, for people listening, thinking about giving stuff away, be careful with physical stuff. And unfortunately, if people who win live in like Europe or Australia, it's going to cost you an arm or a leg to send it over there. Yeah. So just be careful.
It's true. Yeah. No, you can get it's just complicated. It's like, stick to digital or something you can control more or less.
Right.
I dig that.
How would you where would these contests live? Like, do you do Facebook contests? Is it right there on the podcast? Kind of a rough structure.
Yeah, so I'll have I'll send you my my funnel for contests. It's like a copy and paste funnel. Like you can put in the show notes, people can see it. And it's a ClickFunnels page, so you can just duplicate it out.
Yep.
And what we'll do is normally we'll do like a little ad or a promo on the podcast. Nowadays, what I find is easier is if you just have like a 2-minute episode. Instead of because what happens is people listen to the episode from 6 months down the road and they'll hit you up like, hey, is the contest still live? Mm-hmm. It's like, no. So if you have it as a separate episode, you can just delete it off your feed afterwards, which makes it easier and cleaner.
Got it.
So you can promote it on the podcast, promote it on your Facebook, change your banners on LinkedIn and YouTube to drive traffic to the contest for that month. You can have some paid traffic going to it. Mm-hmm. And then also this is something I learned from Noah Kagan on his blog. What you would do to make it really good is you would invite other companies or people, like maybe old podcast guests, like, hey, would you like to be a part of our contests or sponsor our contests? And they would give something away for free. And then they would also help you promote it too. in order to get access to a wider audience, because now they have something in the giveaway that their audience probably love to get too.
Sure, they're invested in it. Yeah,
exactly. So getting them to help promote, or giving them the tools to promote, maybe a couple email swipes, is a really cool way, because now you've got a higher value or higher perceived value contest with all these people, like all their courses or their retreats or whatever, as the prizes. And now you've also got them invested in it, so now they can go ahead and also share it as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Shout out to Noah Kagan for that one.
Noah. Yeah.
I love that.
Sweet.
Well, I think we're already over time. That hour just like flew by super fast.
Sorry, we actually went over. I was like, oh crap, we got to wrap this up.
No, it's been an awesome conversation, and obviously a very selfish one, because we want to grow our podcast. So
I think
might as well learn from the best.
A good takeaway, like for anyone listening, if you don't have a podcast, just go back to what we were talking about, just content in general, like even with contests and all these reaching out to get featured somewhere. It's like
all applies.
It all applies. So just don't get lost in the terms.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. This is transferable across many mediums.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a couple quick wrap-up questions here. Do you have any books that you recommend to your clients, or maybe you refer back to often, or any books that have just been really impactful that you revisit every once in a while?
I do. I have a book right in front of me. It's called Words That Sell. Words That Sell is a book. It's literally like a giant swipe file book. So if you're writing emails, if you're writing copy, if you're writing things, and you want a different way to phrase something, I have this book. It's open on my desk all the time, and I just flip through it sometimes, and I look for different ways to lead in to emails or Facebook posts and things like that, or even like podcast titles.
I need that. That's actually one of the things I struggle with, but I don't think we have time to get into that today. Is actually how to name the podcast episodes.
Right. It's copywriting 101, right? That's super important. So Words That Sell, it's by it's by Richard Banyan, Bayan. I've given this book away a bunch of times. It's really good. So that's one. Podcast specific, I would say there's a podcast book out there called Big Podcast.
Oh yeah, I've got that one by Hopper or David Hooper or something, I think. Yeah,
exactly. That's him. Yeah. I'm trying to pull it up in front of me. That's a good one too. I'll look through that every now and then just to get some ideas. He's from the radio. He's from the radio space originally, I believe, and he's got some really interesting takes on ways to grow your podcast. So those two, I would say, are good starts. Yeah, that's probably my two biggest ones, besides my own, of course.
And yours is how to get your first 100,000 podcast downloads in 100 days. So where can folks go check you out and get that book too?
Best place to go to check out the book. What I want to do for your audience is I'll give them the free copy.
Nice.
So we'll link that in the show notes, but that'll be over. Check out the hard copy. It's at podcastdomination.co.
Okay.
Not .com. I don't know where you'll go if you go to .com, but
.co. Yeah, sweet. And then so in the show notes we'll link up the how to get the free copy as well, the digital version. Sweet.
Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, I think this has been great, and I think a round 2 is in order as well.
Oh yeah, I think we could probably talk about this stuff for 4 hours if our audience would actually stick around for 4 hours to hear us talk about it.
We never know. We haven't tried.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
Well, hopefully we run into each other either in Austin, San Diego, or at some podcast conference.
Are you going to Podfest out in Florida? By chance?
I am not. No. I've got a buddy who's speaking. I'm going to TNC though.
Okay. You'll be at TNC. Okay. Well, we're speaking at that, so we'll see you at TNC then.
Let's do it.
Nice. Okay, cool. I'll be there the day before at. Have you heard of Mimosa Mastermind?
Yep.
Yes.
That's Amber Spears.
Amber Spears and Brett Farrell.
Okay.
We know Amber. Yeah. I don't know Brett. Yeah.
I'll introduce you to Brett. Brett's a really, really good guy. We're launching this podcast soon for one of his like celebrity like medical like doctors has a big following. We're launching it for him. So that'll be fun. But the Mimosa Mastermind is really cool. A lot of affiliate marketers in there.
Yeah.
Probably guys you both know.
She's invited us. Yeah, it was like late last year. It was a super last
It was
minute
in
thing.
Cabo, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
last
okay.
time it was at least.
Yeah. She invited us to the Cabo one, but it was like, it's happening this weekend. We're like, oh shit,
Yeah.
not gonna happen. But
Sorry, Amber.
well,
Yeah.
very cool, Luis. This has been amazing. We'll have to do a round 2. Looking forward to hanging out at TNC in next month.
Sure.
So that'll be fun. And appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, thank you guys both. I appreciate it. Looking forward to both having you guys on my show as well.
Thank you, man.
So we got to get that set up soon.
We'll do it. All right, brother.
Did we shout out the name of your show? What's the name of your show?
Oh, the Podcast Domination Show. That's the main one.
Okay, Podcast Domination Show. So if they go to podcastdomination.co, they'll get introduced to your podcast.
Through the book, they will. So if they download the book, I have plugs for it in there as well.
Nice.
So
Okay.
that'll work.
Get the book. Go to the show notes. Awesome, Luis. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for tuning into that episode. I hope you dug it. I know Joe and I dug it. I actually kicked Joe out of the room. He's not here right now because I wanted to tell you about a tool that I really, really dig. We use it in our business. We recommend it all the time. It's called Easy Webinar, and it's a tool that lets you do live webinars, automated webinars, hybrid webinars, and, pretty much any other kind of webinar if there are other kinds of webinars. But anyway, this tool is kind of like your all-in-one, do-it-all tool for anything webinar related. It's Easy Webinar. It's put out by a dude named Casey Zeman. He's been on the podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode, it's a killer episode. He's a really smart dude, but his software is amazing. It does everything. It's, the title tells you exactly what it does. It's an easy webinar platform. And we use this in our business to run automated webinars all the time. We don't do a lot of live webinars these days. We like to do the kind of automated webinars where somebody can register and then they can either watch it like 15 minutes later or they can watch it the next day, but it's just kind of always running. And it's a system that helps us make autopilot sales off of our webinars. Super cool tool. If you haven't tried it yet, it's an amazing tool. And Casey is actually hooking you up. He said for listeners of Hustle and Flowchart, I can't believe he's doing this, but he said for listeners of the Hustle and Flowchart podcast, he's giving 25% off of the membership to use Easy Webinar. It's already super, super inexpensive for what it does and all the cool features it has, but he's hooking you up with 25% off because you're a listener of Hustle and Flowchart. Go to easywebinar.com/hustle. That's where you can get that 25% off discount. That's easywebinar.com/hustle. It's a awesome tool. You're going to dig it. So just go grab it. Check it out. easywebinar.com/hustle. See ya. No, not see ya. You'll hear me in the next show. I don't know how to close these things. Go get Easy Webinar. Talk to you later. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Hustle and Flowchart podcast. For taking the time to listen, we want to give you something a little bit special. Every single episode that we do, we actually have somebody on our team take notes. We basically have a Cliff's Notes version of every episode where you can go and find all of the tips and tactics that they laid out, all of the resources that they laid out, all the good stuff from this episode. We actually have a nice simple notes version that you can find on our website. So go to evergreenprofits.com, find this episode that you just listened to, and give us your email address and we'll send you the notes. Thanks for listening. Go get it. Wiki wiki.